Hello everybody and welcome to B-Movie Enema. I'm your host Jeff Arbuckle, your friendly neighborhood B-movie proctologist. And with me as always is Nurse Disembody. Say, Nurse, do you happen to know what we're watching this week?
No, what are we watching?
Well, this week's movie is one of those good old-fashioned Italian giallo films. However, when I think about it, I'm not so sure I should do any house calls for Alan, who's our lead in this movie. Now you see, Alan's a bit of a playboy. He's definitely an aristocrat who is fresh from the mental institution after the death of his wife, Evelyn. And let's just say that Alan is a little cuckoo crazy. He's at least a little deranged. He's at best a little hedonistic in his love of redheads, and at worst, he's downright debaucherous with how he treats them. So, I'm not so sure that if I'd show up for a cleansing, that I wouldn't be in a compromising position myself, or if I'd be performing the procedure on an unwilling patient. This is Italian thriller at its best. This is Emilio Miraglia's The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave. Now, Miraglia only made one more movie after this one and pretty much just kind of seemingly retired. He worked throughout the 60s as a second unit director before taking over the main director's chair with 1967's Assassination. After The Red Queen Kills 7 Times, another notable giallo of his, he just disappeared. I mean, not like spooky disappeared. He just seemingly quit. And this movie stars Anthony Stephan as our aristocratic Lord Alan Cunningham. Stephan is an interesting person himself. He was born to a Formula One racer who had become an ambassador at the time, and that person's name was Manuel de Teffe. And he changed his name to Stephan in the mid-60s and set off on a pretty significant spaghetti western career. Now, Stephan was basically considered the Italian Clint Eastwood. Most people would best know him as playing the outlaw Django in Django the Bastard, which turned out to be more or less rumored, or at least believed to be, the inspiration for Eastwood's performance in High Plains Drifter. So I guess what goes around comes around, eh? Now, he also played alongside some pretty big-time people when it comes to European cinema, like William Berger, Sophia Loren, Claudia Cardinal, Elke Sommer, Franco Nero, and many more. He was really popular in Brazil, too. I mean, of course, being of Brazilian descent, the son of a Brazilian racing champion, and the Brazilian love of spaghetti westerns from Italy, Stephan would ultimately find a home in his later years in the country until he ultimately passed away. And this was one of the very first B-Movie Enema articles on the site. In fact, it was the second article way back in October of 2014. And it was one of those movies that pleasantly surprised me. I remember commenting on something that I still think about every time that I watch an Italian movie. Just how much it seems they desperately wanted you to think that this was an English guy living in England, doing stuff in London or whatever. And despite that, the movie works really, really well. It's one of the better movies that I've probably ever watched for the blog, so it's absolutely my pleasure to watch it again. In fact, why wait around, Nurse? I mean, let's jump into the movie, and we'll be back after the first part of this movie, and we'll talk a little bit more about The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave. Hey, say, Nurse, you kind of look like my cheating dead ex. Mind doing a little bit of a striptease for me while I set up some shackles over there? I mean, there's a few £100 in it for you.
Okay, sure. Hey, now wait just a minute.
Alright, so we most definitely have some shenanigans to get us started with this movie. Now, Alan here is a little bit of a nut. He picks up a red-headed hooker and lures her back to a place that is basically a castle that I guess he has nothing but bad memories of. Now, as a pretty smart maneuver, he says he can't smoke while driving, which I suppose is fine because I'm pretty sure his date can't chew bubblegum and walk at the same time. Anyway, it gives him an excuse to get out of his car and check the old tires and swap out his license plate. And by the way, that whole maneuver of saying, well, I can't smoke and drive at the same time, I need to check at the tires, and then swapping out the license plate so that you can make off with a red-headed hooker or whatever so that you can kill her, well, that's called a Roman what do you say. Anyway, he takes the girl to a cobwebby dungeon and kills her and burns all the evidence. Now, Dr. Richard Timberland, who happens to be Alan's doctor, who also happened to be driving by Alan's castle, stops by to tell Alan that he's got to stop with all this Evelyn shit. Now, Dr. Richard is played by Giacomo Rossi Stewart, which I don't know how you get Giacomo, then Rossi, and then Stewart. But anyway, now he was in many, many Italian movies and productions, basically working with both the director of this movie and various actors from this movie in other instances. But most notably, two movies stand out to me. The first is being in one of Joe D'Amato's Black Emanuelle movies starring Laura Gemser. The other being one of the few people in The Last Man on Earth, starring Vincent Price. And we also meet some of the various players in this movie alongside of Alan and his doctor, who is, this doctor, by the way, is legitimately trying to help him. But first, we have Evelyn's brother, Albert. And he's a guy who likes to peep in on the goings-on in Alan's castle. He is shady as fuck and is always around helping out with the grounds and so forth. And then we also meet the affable George. Now, George is one of Alan's cousins who basically likes to swing, and he's constantly telling Alan where he can pick up some trim, basically. But by the way, when you have a friend or a family member who's constantly setting you up with strange, that's called a Twin Cities coup d'etat. But I digress. Anyway, primarily though, what we are seeing is that Alan is far from okay. He seems to be perfectly fine, but the sight of a hot redhead sends him into a murderous rage. Look, I get it, okay? I mean, you get a look at those ruby orange locks and it's bad news, man. I really get it. I really do. Add to it that if the redhead does a spooky striptease by crawling out of a literal coffin on stage, ooh, buddy, that's dangerous business. Now, that fetching redhead spooky stripper is Susie, played by Erica Blanc. Now, Blanc has been in an insane number of movies over the past 56 years, and she's still working today. She's no stranger to cult movies. She was the very first Emmanuel, not the Black Emmanuel, but the actual Emmanuel based on the book series. And she was in movies with titillating titles like Kill Baby Kill and So Sweet, So Perverse. Now, I know her from The Devil's Nightmare, which came out the same year as this. And in that, she played a succubus that uses people's sins against them when she kills. So to say that Erica Blanc is familiar with the saucier roles is putting it mildly. But I do have a question for everyone. So he tells the stripper that he'll give her £1,000 to come with him back to his castle. Cool, I get it. Man, you got the money, you do whatever you need to do. Now she gets there and he wants her to do everything he says, including dressing up in some really sexy leather lingerie, right? Now, here's the thing. As soon as she zips up those knee-high boots, he goes right in for the kill. Now, what's the point in having her dress up? Like, don't you want to enjoy that stuff for a little bit before you offer? I mean, who am I to speak to the mind of an insane person? But you see what I mean when I say that Alan is not all that well in the head. I don't know. I could see that.
Okay, this isn't funny anymore. Can you take the shackles off now?
No. You fed me that fish pie bullshit last week. You can stay chained up there for a little bit longer. Yeah, maybe we should get back to the movie, huh? So our good Dr. Richard Timberland has a prescription for Alan. Get married. That will always be the cure to unstable emotional and psychological problems. Trust me, Alan, it's guaranteed to work. Well, that's exactly what Alan decides to do. He meets a girl at Cousin George's weirdo hippie party that looks like she might be a redhead or a strawberry blonde, but it turns out she's really just a blonde. Now, she's dressed like one of Octopussy's girls in the movie, well, Octopussy, but she leads Alan on a flirty little chase. Now, I guess I should point out that Alan has foxes in a pen back at the castle, and I'm sure that has nothing to do with how he treats women. Anyway, this woman is Gladys, and she's played by Marina Malfatti, and she was almost 40 years old at the time this movie came out. Now, I've seen my fair share of movies from Europe, and one of the things I often find fascinating is that many of the gorgeous leading ladies are already past the age of 30 when they're playing significantly sexy roles. Now, nothing wrong with that whatsoever. I'm in my 40s. My tastes have certainly slanted older in these past few years. Anyway, she would ultimately do much appreciated work on stage in her later years. Anyway, so Alan meets Gladys, tells her he wants to marry her so he can bed her, and then does both. I guess he's a man of his word. This does anger brother-in-law Albert, who blames Alan for Evelyn's death. Now, apparently, he wanted to have kids. Evelyn couldn't. Alan persisted, and she died giving birth. We also learn that Albert is into Alan's aunt Agatha, who, like anyone else named Agatha, is into like seances and shit. So, that said, Alan's castle is back up to working order now that he's married and happy again, or seemingly happy again. However, he's being visited by ghostly images of Evelyn, and that lines up too. You can't ever get rid of exes, man. No matter how hard you try, they're just always still like there. But Dr. Timberland tells Gladys what's what. The official story is that Alan wanted children. Evelyn died giving birth, and Alan blames himself for it. But Timberland says that really wasn't the case. It really wasn't so much that Alan who wanted children, but it was Evelyn herself. Alan had become unstable, or had started to become unstable, so he began insisting that Evelyn was cheating on him. And so he wanted a divorce. She risked getting pregnant, and then ultimately died in childbirth. And that's why old Alan has issues with redheads. He can't really ever seem to have his revenge on what he thinks is a cheating wife. Now, The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave is an example of a subgenre of Italian cinema called the giallo. Now, gialli is simply mystery thrillers, really. The Italian word giallo translates to yellow. It's called that because of cheap paperback novels that were popular in Italy that have yellow covers. And gialli generally tended to be more psychological, with themes of madness, alienation, sexuality, paranoia, all the stuff that I just love to have in my own head going on. But usually it's a mystery infused with some sort of gruesome horror, much like my real life. But there's usually a great deal of objectification of women, and sometimes vilifying them, and usually making the primary villain insane or unstable. Usually it also has more style over reliable plot. Often the end doesn't make a whole lot of sense or requires a huge logic jump to get there. But that's not really the key, though. The key is the journey to get to that reveal. Now, giallo films usually have a shadowy or unknown figure stalking characters as well. Usually they are wearing gloves. We saw Albert get attacked in the previous segment by a gloved figure with a snake. Additionally, we just saw Aunt Agatha take a rock to the back of the head, and we don't know who it was that attacked or for really what end. Also, we can usually find some sort of supernatural element that isn't always supernatural, but the appearance of such is there nonetheless. What's also interesting is that not all giallo films have the exact same themes or pieces in it, so many things could be labeled a giallo film. And that said, The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave is a fine example of the genre, and one that I think most fans of these types of thrillers pretty much should enjoy. Alright, so let's get back into the final act of this movie, and I'm going to unshackle Nurse Disembody.
It's about time.
But to be honest with you, I hope she can kind of hang in there for a few minutes longer, because I seem to have misplaced the key. Look, I said I was sorry, Nurse. I mean, I know why we got that set up over there, and I know that when we entered into this, we both agreed to doing some really weird shit and stuff, but I really didn't mean to leave you there for so long. I honestly misplaced the key. Hey, so that was the twisty-turny conclusion to The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave. Again, the ending of these gialli don't often make a whole lot of sense. Either that or the movie's conclusion tends to be a bit of a rug pull on the viewers. But why would we follow Gladys going around and checking out all the weird stuff at the castle if ultimately she is guilty and in on the plan to drive Alan mad with Cousin George? I don't know. Also, notice that Agatha was called totally paralyzed by the police investigating the ingestation of Agatha by the foxes. But we also saw her stand up and try to see what Gladys was doing right before she got her head bonked by the killer. We also not entirely sure who the killer was either, but whatever. But I'll be damned if it wasn't a great ride to that baffling conclusion. I mean, okay, so there's that one scene in which Alan wants to look inside Evelyn's coffin, right? And there's a body in there that gets up and starts following him and beckoning to him, but it's revealed to be someone else, right? I mean, someone who had to go out there before a storm, wait in the coffin for who knows how long, just in the off chance that Alan wants to go out there and check on that, right? I mean, who knows? The whole point is that George and Gladys were working together this whole time. He then poisons Gladys to basically get everything of Alan's that he left behind while he got institutionalized again. But wait, there's more. The person who is impersonating Evelyn the whole time was Susie. You know, the stripper, the spooky stripper that we assumed got killed by Alan earlier, but I guess wasn't. I mean, at least she didn't get killed until Gladys stabbed her a couple of times in the titties. I can't tell you exactly what's going on at the end of this, except that George set it all up, and by happy accident, Gladys offed Susie while Gladys was succumbing to poison. But wait, Alan and Richard set George up. It was all a setup to reveal that there were people who were trying to drive Alan crazy. George hits Richard in his Dr. Dick before he tries to kill Alan, but he dumps George into the pool and throws some acid in there, which burns George, but he gets arrested nonetheless. And Alan, our hero, well, I guess he gets away with all of his crimes. Again, don't ask me exactly what's going on here, but do know that George teasing and egging on the two women while they are nearing their own death is just chilling, especially when he tells them that the worms are waiting. That's such a cool line. Now, Nurse, are you like maybe a little less upset now to where maybe you might be able to get people to, you know, like be able to tell them where they can find our stuff and whatnot?
I suppose. You can find all of Jeff's writings and upcoming episodes at www.bmovieenema.com. You can follow the page at Facebook and Twitter and check out episodes on YouTube. If you have a Roku, get OtherWorlds TV and check him out along with all the other hosts that appear there on weekends.
Thank you so much, Nurse. Look, I really do mean it. I really did not mean to leave you shackled up there for so long. I really did mean it. I'm very, very sorry.
I guess I will be all right. Besides, just remember one thing, my dear Jeffrey. The worms are waiting.
Yoinks.